this year to be here tonight as we talk about sort of the Bible in broad strokes overall. This morning we're in Genesis 12 through 38 as you've been following along in your reading. Of course, we really should have gotten through chapter 40 in your reading, but hopefully you can catch up. As we're talking about the patriarchs this morning, the grouping of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the typical grouping as it appears in the Bible 20 times. The fathers, typically called the fathers. I'm using the term patriarch because it's fancier, I guess. But the fathers. This is the fathers of Israel as we think about the Israelite history. And a lot of times throughout the Bible, they refer back to our fathers or the fathers. A lot of times it's this specific grouping, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Exodus 3:13, when Moses is about to go into Egypt, Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers, this phrase, right, your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name, what shall I say? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. Thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go gather the elders of Israel and say, Yahweh, the God of your fathers. Again, the grouping here that we have, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed, and he goes on to talk about how he's going to go about the Exodus, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. What might stand out if you've been reading through with us, if you've been reading through as you've been going through the read through the Bible, if you haven't read the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in a while, is the sheer amount of sin. And I almost put sin in air quotes, but I don't like the way that came about. But especially the amount of sexual sin as you're reading through the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we have to start there. None of these guys were righteous. And I've got righteous in air quotes for a very particular important reason, which we'll talk about as we go. But as you think about their behavior, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, contrasted with the behavior that we see expected of us in the New Testament, the covenant of Christ, and what the epistles are all about, the epistles of faithfulness and love and respect and all these different ideas, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, man, they just didn't fit that category. They just didn't fit that criteria. They all lied repeatedly. Bunch of liars, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham and Isaac about their wives. I think about, if you were reading again through the story of Jacob and Laban, they basically have this sort of contest to see who can deceive the other the best about the sheep. Like, okay, you take the spotted sheep, and Laban says, or I think Jacob says, I'll take the spotted sheep. And then Laban goes and he removes all of the not spotted sheep out of the flock. And then Jacob goes and he sets up sticks by the trough of water so that all the ones that are left become spotted. And they just sort of go back and forth trying to cheat each other out of stuff. They all had problems with marriage and sex. Oh man, so many problems throughout the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You think about Abraham and Hagar, that was a whole bad deal. And Sarah was involved in that very much so. You think about Jacob and his wives, and not really just his wives and his two wives' handmaidens. Basically just let them have a fertility contest. And they're basically thinking, if I have a kid, then Jacob will love me. And they're all competing for his love. And Jacob never why did Jacob never put a stop to this? Jacob, why not put your foot down and be like, hey, we're not going to do it this way? I don't know, but not very great there. They each played favorites with their children. A lot of the problems in the patriarchal stories, and the reason I'm including Genesis 38 in this, is really the story of Joseph is part of this. They all played favorites with their kids. Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and Benjamin. Of course, when we come to Jacob, and the whole business with the story of Joseph, which we'll talk about next week, the story of Joseph, is because Jacob was playing favorites. I love Joseph more than I love you guys. And the rest of his brothers couldn't handle it, and it created a lot of strife and conflict. And so as we think about the patriarchs, the fathers, these are the people, again, that are pointed back to over and over in the Bible. These are the guys, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's important to frame and to remember the framing. In the way that I had this structured originally, we would have already talked about this last Sunday night, but it's okay. We'll talk about covenants tonight. It's important to remember the framing of covenants throughout the Bible and ask the question, what rules and requirements did Yahweh place on the patriarchs? That is, what out of his instructions for righteousness, what did he reveal to the patriarchs? What did he tell them? Hey, this is how I want you to behave. And the implication as we read through this is that he just did not give them the sexual ethic that he gave us, that he gave the Israelites later on, that he did not reveal the details of how he expected them to be righteous. Genesis 26, 1 through 5. There was a famine in the land besides the former famine in the days of Abraham. Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land which I will tell you. Sojourn in this land." This is a reiteration of the covenant and the promise with Isaac. "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands. I will establish the oath I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and give your offspring these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." And there's an implication of like, whoa, wait a minute. Nowhere in the story are we given any sort of indication that there were commandments and statutes and laws. Now, the inference is we can infer that God obviously had talked to Abraham about some stuff that's not recorded in the text of Genesis. Maybe he did that. Maybe God gave Abraham a more detailed list of instructions for righteousness, but it doesn't seem to be, at least in the text, that God did that. That God had this list of requirements for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as he would later on in giving the law in Sinai. And I would suggest that's one of the main sort of emphases, main points of the story of the Exodus as we come to the Mount Sinai later on in the story, and he gives them the law on Mount Sinai. One of the amazing things about giving of the law is up until that point, he hadn't done that. God had not given this long list of detailed rules and regulations and requirements. The revealing of the law at Sinai was such a pivotal event because it seems to be that was one of the first times that God had ever done that in such a detailed way. So when we think about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the covenant that they were given didn't really seem to be based on obedience to a particular set of rules, so much as it was about God's intent to bless, God's intent to convey a blessing through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But ultimately, their covenant between Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not really about them. It was in the immediate context, but there, of course, was something greater that we were looking forward to in Genesis, all these stories in Genesis. We'll read them. Genesis 22:15, this is to Abraham. "The angel of Yahweh called Abraham a second time and said, 'By myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this.'" This is, of course, after he's told to offer Isaac. He goes through the process, is about to kill him, and the angel stops him, right? "Because you have done this and not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." He says it this way to Isaac, Genesis 26, verse 4, "I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and give to your offspring all these lands, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice." We read that earlier. Genesis 28, this is to Jacob. Genesis 28:13, "I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed." The covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this patriarchal covenant that he repeats, first to Abraham, then to Isaac, then to Jacob, was not just about them. It never was just about them. It was about the future. In you, he says it to each of them, in you and your offspring, everyone will find blessing. Everyone will find blessing. And so God's covenants with the patriarchs, I want to make this point one more time before we move on. As far as we can tell, as far as we're told in the story, did not contain the list of rules and regulations that would later come to the Israelites and would be modified and altered again to the Christians, the covenant that comes through Christ. The covenant given at Sinai, which contained the law, and the covenant that came through Christ, which contains, we don't call it the law, but it is a law, the law of liberty, the law that's given in the epistles and all of Jesus' teaching. There's no indication that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had anything like that at all. Just as we don't apply the Christian standard to Jews in the Old Testament, we should be careful not to apply it then to the patriarchs as well. They obeyed God as they knew to obey, and as God asked them to obey. The command that God gave them, especially to Abraham, he did tell him a couple of things. Go to this land. He told them a couple of things as far as, offer your son Isaac, which Abraham obeyed. And Abraham obeyed in the things that he knew to obey. Their success then, as we think about the emphasis of the story is much more emphasizing what God was planning to do for them. Not what they could do for God, not how great they were, but the blessings that God was going to give to them, and by giving it to them, then to us as well. Genesis 24:34, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we see a common theme that God did bless them greatly physically. He said, I am Abraham's servant. This is the servant. He's going to get a wife for Isaac, and he's talking about Abraham. Yahweh has greatly blessed my master. He has become great. He has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold, male servants and female servants, camels and donkeys. When we come to Isaac, Genesis 26 verse 12, Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and Yahweh blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. Genesis 30 verse 27, but Laban said to him, this is Laban talking to Jacob, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that Yahweh has blessed me because of you. And Jacob, as he's doing the things that he's doing with Laban and his flocks and his herds, and everything's becoming more prosperous, and everybody's having more wealth and more material blessing, Laban recognizes it's not because I'm so great, and it's not even really because you're so great, it's because God is so great. The story of the patriarchs is less focused on the righteousness of the men and more on the goodness and blessing of Yahweh, that he is the supplier of all good things. He is the giver of all blessings. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob became great, not because of their greatness, but because of his greatness, which is a pattern that we see repeated throughout the Bible. As we look at the patriarchs, the fathers, we see the establishment of a lot of patterns that are going to be repeated throughout the Bible. That God is the one who ultimately gives blessing. He is the one who ultimately gives good fortune to his people. Now, it's not to say that the men had no part to play. I don't want to just diminish their point to the point of nothingness. The most important commonality, and again, we're thinking about patterns that are established in the patriarchs that are repeated throughout the Bible, these things that come up over and over and over and over. We've seen one of these common themes, which we'll return to at the end, in you all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. But I would suggest the most important commonality, at least from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's perspective, their behavior, their character, why are they held up as the fathers? Why are they the patriarchs, the ones from which all of this begins, is because they established a pattern of faithfulness to Yahweh, a pattern of belief and trust, which was tied in large part to the blessing. They believed that God would bless them, and they believed that God would do the things that he said he would do. The patriarchs were not inherently superior or better to anyone else in the story. That's the point. And all of the lying and the cheating and the stealing and the playing favorites and the sexual sin and all that stuff, they're not better than anyone else in any of the stories. The thing that separates them, the thing that really divides Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from everyone else on the planet at the time that we can tell, not that it's entirely true, but as far as we're told in the story, the thing that makes Abraham special is his faith in God and his willingness to do what God said, right? From the very beginning, God calls Abraham, go to the land that I will show you. Wait, what? Why am I supposed to do that? Where am I going? What is this? None of that. There's no questioning as far as we're told in the text again. Abraham hears the voice of God and he just goes, okay, away with us. And it's interesting the way it's framed in the story. Go to the land that I will show you. Not that I'm going to show you right now. You just go, and on the journey, as you're going, I'll show you where you're going to go. You can't give me an itinerary? Like there's no map list here? Oh, no, he just goes. He leaves and he goes. Think about the story of Genesis 22. Offer your son Isaac. Abraham, I know that I've been telling you this for the last 20 or 30 years, you're going to have a son. He's going to be the great blessing that's going to be all the nations of the earth will be blessed. I know we've done all that. Now I want you to kill him. Wait, what? And you could see, quite reasonably, I think, how Abraham might not want to do that. And how Abraham might have some questions for God. Wait, didn't we just go? Wasn't the whole point that Isaac would be the child of promise? Wasn't the whole point that this is the guy, this is my son? This is what we've been working toward this whole time, and now you just want me to kill him? And the Hebrew writer says, later on, we're not going to read it, the Hebrew writer says in chapter 11, he considered that God might even be able to raise him from the dead. So Abraham didn't have all the answers, but he had a willingness to do what God said. No matter how crazy it seemed, no matter how ridiculous, no matter if he didn't understand it or not, when God told him to do something, he did it. And even if he didn't understand how it was all going to work out, he had faith that it would. Now, again, does that mean they're perfect? No, they weren't perfect. And they did what God said to varying levels of success in the story. But again, that's kind of the point. Not that they were perfect or inherently more righteous or inherently superior in some way, but they believed that he was good. They believed that Yahweh is great. And what made them great was not their own greatness, but his greatness in their choosing to obey and be blessed. All they had to do, as far as we can tell, is believe and obey to the best of their abilities. Believe that I am who I am. Believe that I want to do what I'm going to say I'm going to do. And do to the best of your ability what I want you to do. They believed in his goodness and ability to bless them. And that's really what it comes down to in our lives. We're thinking about the patriarchs, the fathers of our faith. This is it. Genesis 15:6, he believed Yahweh, this is Abraham, and he counted it to him as righteousness. That is, God counted it to Abraham. Genesis 26:25, Isaac built an altar there and called upon the name of Yahweh and pitched his tent there. Jacob, in Genesis 35:2, so Jacob said to his household and all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you, purify yourselves, change your garments, let us go to Bethel that I may make there an altar, the God who answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone. He's been with me this whole time. Put away the foreign gods. The people of Israel throughout the story of the Old Testament, they're going to fluctuate. We're going to see this a lot. People of Israel fluctuate in loyalty to Yahweh. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. A lot of times they're disobedient. A lot of times they don't care about God at all. A lot of times they don't really want to do what he says. But the patriarchs did not waver in this fundamental thing. They did not waver in loyalty to God. They weren't perfect. We understand that. But they were faithful. And so Romans 4:1-8, Paul says it later on. What shall we say was gained by Abraham our father according to the flesh? This is forefather, patriarch physically, but makes an application that applies beyond the physical. If Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. He was not justified by works. For what does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. To the one who works, his wages are counted not as a gift, but as his due. The one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did some things that were not godly. But that's kind of the point. They believed in him who justifies the ungodly. His faith is counted as righteousness, just as David speaks of the blessing of the one to whom God counts righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. If there is perhaps any blessing more, I think, applicable to us in the patriarchs, it's this one, that God did not count their sin against them, that he forgave and blessed even so. And as we think about the patriarchs, the fathers of our faith, the ones whom that we ultimately follow in the footsteps of, Hebrews 11:6 is the whole story. This is the essence of the patriarch story. Without faith, it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. That's it. That's the essence of their story. They believed that he existed, and they believed that he rewards those who seek him. and thus they drew near to God. This is the essence of the story. Do you believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him? It's a very simple question even today. Do you believe that God exists? Do you believe that he rewards those who seek him? What does seeking him look like? Well, the story of the Bible, as we're going to go through the story, progressively answers this question, gives more and more detail to what seeking him looks like. What does he intend for us to do in seeking him? What's the reward? It's the fulfillment of the promise to the patriarchs, isn't it? The ultimate reward, as we think about our faith, is the promise that he made to them, in you all the nations shall be blessed. In Galatians 3:13 and 14, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, as it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree, so that in Jesus the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles. Raise your hand if you're a Gentile. I don't know. There might be some Jews in here. I suspect most of us are Gentiles. This promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was for you. Not just the Jews. It was for us. In them, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's you and I. We are here today because of a promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that promise that was fulfilled in Jesus so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. He's not just the father of the Jews, he's your father. I'm talking about Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are not just the patriarchs of the Jewish nation, they are the patriarchs of this assembly because we follow in their promise. We'll end with Romans 4:16 and 17. This will be the last thing we read. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring. This is talking about Abraham, not only to the adherent of the law, but to the one who shares the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. He's writing in Romans to Jews and Gentiles, and he goes between, and especially in the first two chapters, sometimes he's talking to the Jews, sometimes he's talking to the Gentiles. Later on in Romans chapter 9 through 11, he makes this distinction again, talking about sometimes the Jews who rejected Jesus and the Gentiles who've been added into the church. In Romans 4, he makes it clear, I'm talking about all of us. Jews, Gentiles, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you're from. Abraham is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you the father of many nations, in the presence of God in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. What a great summation of who the God we serve is. He gives life to the dead and he calls into existence the things that don't exist. Do you believe that to be true? Do you believe that he has the power to give you life? Do you believe that he has the power to call into existence things that have never existed before? Ultimately, learning from the patriarchs is this. We're going to sing Faith of Our Fathers, quite a perfect song to go along with this lesson. Faith of our fathers living still. We who have the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the invitation is to join that family, right? The invitation is to accept the blessing of Jesus, first made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That promise made, in you all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. That could be you today. You could experience the blessing of that, which Paul said, what was it in Romans? Blessed is the man whom the Lord does not count his iniquity, who forgives his transgression. That could be you today. Come while we stand and sing.